Hi, this is Adam Carroll with Justice for All, an NGO that works on behalf of persecuted minorities. And we are going to be speaking today about Nigeria, the current crisis that's erupted over there around police brutality. And on our show, we'll be having Juliette Paauwe from the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect. And we'll be speaking with her in just a second. We do this show on various YouTube and Facebook platforms and Muslim Network TV. And the focus is usually on human rights in the world. So, Juliette, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. And Juliette conducts research as senior research analyst and focuses on Cameroon, Nigeria, Sudan, and South Sudan. That's quite a lot. And Juliette leads the Global Center's work on Group of Friends of R2P in New York and is involved in the center's work on UN peacekeeping, protection of civilians, and international justice. And Juliette, you are from Denmark or from Netherlands?
The Netherlands, yeah.
Netherlands, yeah. You're fluent in Dutch and you speak Danish and German and French too, to some extent. But you're like a walking EU, except with better human rights. I was wondering if you could say a bit more about the center and about your role.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thanks again for having me. It's super excited and it's timely to also discuss Nigeria today. So thanks for that. I will briefly introduce the work of the Global Center for R2P. So our work focuses mainly on the implementation of the responsibility to protect, which is a global norm or a political commitment that was unanimously adopted in 2005 at the World Summit by all heads of states and governments. And R2P is aimed at preventing and halting genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and ethnic cleansing. And we also refer to them, and I will also do that today, to atrocity crimes. So R2P stipulates that every state has the primary responsibility to protect its own populations against these four crimes. And the international community has the responsibility to assist and help those states, every state, in meeting those responsibilities. And if a state is manifestly failing to do so, then the international community must be prepared to take appropriate action in a timely and decisive manner in accordance with the UN Charter. So to translate this commitment into action, R2P has been implemented through the so-called atrocity prevention lens. And that is exactly what we at the Global Center are also applying when we are looking at particular country situations. So we're looking to human rights abuses and violations, but particularly those that can escalate into atrocity crimes and whether there are risks of atrocity crimes. So that means that currently we are monitoring over 20 countries where we think that there is a risk of atrocity crimes or where atrocity crimes are being committed. We also do advocacy around those country situations. We help states building capacity and influence decision makers on how to prevent mass atrocities. And we provide advice and help to mobilize timely action in countries where it's escalating. And you mentioned we have a couple of projects like peacekeeping, Group of Friends of R2P, Global Network of R2P focal points, the protection of cultural heritage. We have a small office in Geneva, which focuses on the Human Rights Council, and I am based in New York with the rest of my colleagues, mainly focusing on the Security Council. So that's a brief introduction to our work.
Yeah, well, it's great, and I've been impressed with the center's ability to engage nation states, member nations of the UN. It's not easy, and often, especially before the pandemic, it was clear that you could get response and involvement from a whole range of nations. But of course, now in the pandemic, it all has to be online, and so that's something that we're all getting used to. As far as the work that you do, just before we get into discussing the situation in Nigeria, I was wondering about these group of friends. Well, who are these nations that are supportive of R2P? Because not all of them are.
Right, and even within the group of friends, there are sometimes disagreements
Mm.
because it's one of the biggest groups actually at the UN. It's 45 members,
Mm.
54 member states, sorry, with
Mm.
and the European Union as a regional organization. It's cross-regional, so we always make sure that together with the co-chairs, that if we want to expand the group, that they also always should come in pairs, so not only having the global north, but always like having a cross-regional representation.
Mm.
So yeah, it's 54 members, and we are acting as a secretariat. So we are doing the supporting work behind the scenes because it's and we also want it to be a very state-led initiative. We are meeting at ambassador level, we're meeting at expert level with UN officials, with undersecretary generals, assistant secretary generals, to link their work to R2P, to make sure that the UN also knows that there is a big group of member states that actually care a lot about R2P and want to champion it and mainstream it into the UN system. And sometimes we are mobilizing it as a group. We're using it as a platform to, for example, deliver statements during open debates in the Security Council on linking women, peace, and security. We're linking POC or peacekeeping to R2P to make that connection between the agendas and how important it is that supporting the one is also contributing to supporting the other. So that's basically what we use the group of friends for.
Yeah, well, and just to remind people that R2P is responsibility to protect. We're all used to using that. So R2P as an important concept in atrocity prevention, genocide prevention, and stopping these war crimes and so forth. There are nation states that are doubling down on sovereignty, and that it's not making the point or making their point that it's none of anyone's business but their own if they persecute and massacre their own civilians. And then, of course, oppression takes many forms. But as far as the work of the group of friends, how do you or how does the center promote this ideal of R2P, especially regarding the most severe crimes?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And of course, like the sovereignty discussion, and some countries currently having a different opinion on that than others, is a very big challenge, of course, for implementing R2P, and also for anyone working on atrocity prevention or even human rights prevention or human rights protections. It has been extremely difficult to have the group of friends as a group unitely talking about specific situations, unfortunately. We are slowly trying to introduce that because, of course, you can understand that many have like economic ties or political ties with particular country situation that makes it extremely difficult to have a united one voice of the 54 members. But yeah, we're trying our best to, and that's why we also focus a lot on like bilateral like influence there. Like, for example, recently also on Canada calling out like China during a debate in the General Assembly. Those kind of steps are very important, and that is also why we sometimes prefer to work individually with states, because then you can accomplish more than if you want the group of friends as a 54 member states want to do something like collectively, which is like difficult because of all the internal preferences and politics.
Well, then that brings us to, the African countries, all different from each other, and specifically Nigeria. I'll just read from today's Washington Post. In the 2 weeks since Nigerians began flooding the streets to rally against a police unit widely viewed as abusive, overseas megastars such as Beyonce, Rihanna, Cardi B, and Drake have thrown their fame behind the cause. Now the protest is dominating social media feeds on practically every continent, and by Wednesday had made its way into the US presidential race. The United States must stand with Nigerians who are peacefully demonstrating for police reform and seeking an end to corruption in their democracy, Democratic candidate Joe Biden said in the statement. So again, that's one way to frame it, and make it interesting to American readers. But as far as this report and your concerns go, what is happening? What is suddenly blown up in Nigeria?
Yeah, it's interesting what you said, that suddenly there's so much outrage like internationally, and I'm always surprising to see the power of social media, because the current like events in Nigeria is very much inspired by young activists, meaning that it's also being used on social media with the hashtag #EndSARS like campaign. So this is also why it spreads to like other countries, and they've been really interesting how that flows. And also we saw that in Sudan as well with the overthrow of President al-Bashir. Is that social media and the strength of the youth is very important. So what is going on in Nigeria, it looks for many people as an isolated event, but it has like roots in like it's going on for many years now, and it's like building up slowly, and it's now erupting. So what is going on is that like since the beginning of October, thousands of protesters have taken to the streets across Nigeria and the big cities mainly, to call upon the authorities to abolish this police unit that you refer to. It's the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, or SARS. So originally this unit was established to tackle violent crime in Nigeria, was mainly particularly active in the beginning of the 1990s. And it has also been accused, unfortunately, of grave human rights violations, including extrajudicial killings, torture, arbitrary arrest, extortion. And this is not the first time, actually, that people are protesting against this police brutality and this specific unit. But this time it continues, and that is interesting to see, because President Buhari made a lot of promises, and people just simply don't believe anymore what he is saying. Like soon after the demonstrations erupted 2 weeks ago, he immediately announced that he would dissolve this particular unit, that he would make sure that the police would be reformed, all these promises, but people simply don't believe him anymore. Africa, like Nigeria is the biggest populous country in Africa. It has over 200 million people. The median age is 18, actually, so it's a very young country. 43% is between 0 and 14 years old. It's the largest oil supplier, and yet it also has the largest community of people living in extreme poverty. So there's also a lot of corruption. And there are currently like many security issues in Nigeria. So it's not only police brutality, it's also Boko Haram in the north, it's intercommunal violence, it's banditry, which all creates problems for civilians. People feel unsafe, there's huge insecurity, there's a huge poverty, huge levels of unemployment. And then you have President Buhari, we constantly promises things to make things better, and it's just not working. So this is now erupting all in the hashtag #EndSARS, in the police unit demonstrations, but it amplifies like so many more messages. So yeah, it all like erupted and escalated into this very serious event that happened in the Lekki district in Lagos, where there was the authorities in Lagos issued and imposed a curfew at noon in the afternoon, which would take into effect at 4 p.m. While people were still out on the streets to demonstrate. So eventually people didn't want to leave. Allegedly, the security forces turned off the CCTV cameras in the neighborhoods. They turned off the lights. And while people were sitting on the grounds singing the anthem, security forces opened fire and live ammunition onto the crowds, killing several people, injured many more. So this is exactly how it all escalated. And yeah, I was on social media, everything was live filmed, and that is how it
yeah, as you said, it sounds like the social media aspect. I mean, filming these police abuses and atrocities, it has been really a powerful part of this as a thing, and as a kind of helping to create a social movement, or at least a social moment, where some reform may be possible. But it resonates with the George Floyd and other protests in the U.S. And yet, perhaps, how would you compare them? And do people want the same things, or really not?
I think like every single situation, of course, has its own context, and it's like difficult to compare the two situations as similar. Of course, and the US and Nigeria are unfortunately not the only ones where we see excessive use of force by the police, and where they are also similar is possibly the lack of like any accountability. Because that's also a problem in Nigeria. It's like the consistent impunity across all levels of security forces, also at the government, is why these things are happening again. And you see like across the globe, it's not only Nigeria, it's not only the US, but people are becoming dissatisfied with like politics, with COVID-19 measures. Conspiracy theories are building. Also in Nigeria, the police killed 18 people in April by just like enforcing COVID-19 measures. So yeah, this is something that is like comparable to all countries, but I think that the context of Nigeria is particularly different from the United States, is that Nigeria has so many more issues, like an armed conflict with Boko Haram, intercommunal violence, where the government and the authorities are just unable to protect its own populations against these atrocity crimes. And that's increasingly creating dissatisfaction with the people.
We'll put on the comments a link to the Amnesty International report that came out in June, as well as your own reports. The concerns, as you say, are complex. There's a cycle of impunity and also violence and a lot of insecurity. So I guess people are not asking to defund the police so much as reform the police to keep it honest instead of becoming a corrupt gang. In looking at the country as a whole, pretty big country, about half Muslim, half Christian. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, to what extent is this rooted in tribal or intercommunal tensions?
Yeah, that is something that plays a big role in Nigeria as well, because you say like 50%-ish like Christian and Muslims, but there are also 250 different ethnic groups. So you can imagine how difficult that is, and that plays into politics, that plays into access to land, division of government positions, access to education. It all is across religious and ethnic lines. And the intercommunal violence mainly is between the herdsmen and the farmers, where herdsmen are like trying to have access to crops, and farmers are like unable to exploit their land because of intrusion of herders. So there's a lot of like violence there, where the herdsmen are particularly and predominantly Muslim, whereas the farmers are predominantly Christian. So even though it looks like an agricultural dispute over land, it's actually across religious lines, which exacerbates and the whole conflict. So yeah, and we see the intercommunal violence is particularly taking place at the Middle Belt region, where, because the Muslims are predominantly in the north and the Christians are predominantly in the south, and at the Middle Belt, it's where it all comes together. And like thousands of people have been killed. It has displaced hundreds of thousands of people. It sharpens the ethnic and religious divisions. The majority of the attacks as well are retaliatory in nature. They have an ethnic component, and it's also about like resource scarcity. And I think that is also an interesting like topic to touch upon because of climate change. Because the government response also appears to be like inadequate. You know, they're trying to give like the herders more access to land, which is at the expense of the farmers. So there's a lot of creation of tension, and that the government is unable to really address that. And yeah, we see that it has like an adverse effect on the stability of the region, including like the water scarcity, the drought, the desertification, the land degradation, food insecurity, all exacerbates these kind of conflicts between different communities.
So this is not just about police brutality. Yeah. Well, that's the tip of an iceberg then, an important one though, because that's what you run into first, I guess. I don't know, but as far as the what one deals with, the pressure now is to reform this police unit and to hold responsible those who have been killing protesters, peaceful protesters. Looking back, though, on in recent history in Nigeria, we know that there have been tensions in some of the areas, like the Ogoni tribe, and there's been a destabilizing influence of international investors and industries like Royal Dutch Shell, and you're from that area, so I wonder if you're, what you have to say about that and how that's affected Nigeria.
Right. Yeah, it has a huge impact. Like, it doesn't fall like necessarily within the mandate of the Global Center, because that's more about like human rights abuses, not necessarily meeting the threshold of atrocity crimes, which is an interesting question though. Like, why is environmental damage is interesting to look at in itself. And of course, like, Shell has been like systematically polluting the area, damaging the environment, contaminated water and land, like hugely disadvantaging particular ethnic groups in there. And I think also big companies always have a responsibility to protect human rights in general. So it's not only governments, it's also businesses and companies. And what we also see is that the Dutch Shell also like benefited, and this all plays into the demonstrations as well, is from the weakness in the Nigeria's justice and regulatory systems, and they could like benefit from that and continue their work basically, while big ethnic groups, their livelihoods were impacted. They could not exploit the lands that they like lived on like for many decades, years. So yeah, this is like one of the part of the things that are worrying, of course, that the Nigerian government is not able to protect its populations and seeing other things as a priority. Because even though it's the largest oil producing country, yet the most people, it has the largest population in extreme poverty. There's huge corruption. So yeah, people are dissatisfied, and it's now all erupting.
Yeah. Well, mentioning the failure to protect its own citizens and its own people, there's, of course, Boko Haram. And I think many people are somewhat aware of the movement, the international response to the abduction of all those young women a couple of years ago. What was the hashtag that got so famous? It was something like "Save Our Girls" or something. But I mean, I saw a lot of interest in that situation. What's an update about that? Were the women all restored to their homes? Or did some of them join Boko Haram? What really happened there?
Yeah, so those girls were abducted in 2014, and that is also just like with these protests today or this week is that made the international media, right? There was huge outrage on that. Well, Boko Haram has been active for many years before that, and the Nigerian government has been unable to stop that, even though they tried hard. And also what they did in their response to Boko Haram was that they were unable or unwilling to differentiate between Boko Haram fighters and civilians. So there's a huge like humanitarian crisis now in the northeast where Boko Haram is active, a huge displacement. And yeah, and that all leads up to 2014 is when those girls were abducted, because the purpose of Boko Haram is, of course, that they want to abolish the secular system of the government and establish a Sharia law in the country. And they're particularly opposed to Western-style modern education. So they consistently attack education and schools, abducting students, and also those 276 girls from Chibok. And yeah, that made the headlines. That drew like a lot of attention to Nigeria, to the situation with Boko Haram, and also parents and other people that were following Nigeria complained about the government's like slow and inadequate response to the kidnappings of those girls. It even is like there's a rumor that the government got a 4-hour advance warning about this attack and was unable to respond or unwilling. They say that they didn't have the capacity to send any troops to the area. But that's of course unfortunate, and that is why people are increasingly dissatisfied as well. So what happened to those girls? It's still unclear how many are still in Boko Haram's custody. Like during the past couple of years, like since they were kidnapped in 2014, like some were able to escape. Some were freed by regional forces or Nigerian forces. But some are still into their like captivity, like used as sex slaves or used as like cleaners, and because yeah, they didn't think that those girls had a right to follow education, and especially not the Western education that Nigeria was teaching.
Well, it's pretty horrific, and yet I feel like this sporadic attention from the international community isn't sustained enough to be helpful. I don't know if the international community is funding any useful programs to prevent not just radicalization as such, but to create educational opportunities to build the capacity to coexist, with all these 250 ethnicities. Does the UN or do international humanitarian agencies play a useful role, do you find?
Yeah, there's a huge presence of different UN entities in Nigeria. Not only like the Food and Agriculture Organization or the ones like focused on development, and the UN Refugee Agency, UN Women, OHCHR is there actually to support and assist the resident coordinators, the UN country team on human rights monitoring, and various other things. The International Organization for Migration is there, and also UNICEF plays a big role also on the education part and the access to schools. So yeah, there's of course tons of humanitarian organizations, because the humanitarian situation in the north is dire. So there's a lot of attention on that as well. But you're absolutely right. There's like, especially in New York where we are based, there's not much like opportunity to discuss Nigeria. It's not officially on the agenda of the Security Council, and it sometimes it's useful that, for example, in 2019, the special rapporteur on extrajudicial executions, Agnes Kalamar, made a trip to Nigeria and had some great statements afterwards, which is important, and it shows that there is still interest of the international community, of course, in improving the situation. And since 2010, Nigeria is also under preliminary examination at the International Criminal Court on Boko Haram, but also Nigeria security forces' response to Boko Haram and intercommunal violence as well.
I actually didn't realize that it was at the court or being considered. When was that, and is that still the case?
Yeah, it's since 2010. and it's still under preliminary examination until the prosecutor is making a decision that she wants to proceed with an investigation. Today, she issued a statement on also the current events, like how the security forces need to like restrain, and that she's keeping an eye on the situation. So I think that is very important as well, to put some pressure on the Nigerian government to that they know that the international community is watching.
Good. Okay, we're going to take a moment to do one of our breaks. So for station identification, this is Adam Carroll working with Justice for All. The show is UN This Week.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, it's your brother Zain Bika from South Africa. One of the first educational programs ever produced for Muslim children was the ever popular Adam's World series. The colorful and comical Muslim puppets stole the heart of a generation. Sound Vision will be releasing brand new episodes of Adam's World with the launch of a Adam's World app. Subscribers will enjoy new Adam's World episodes as they are released, as well as all the classic episodes of Adam's World. So visit adamsworldapp.com now to learn more, subscribe and enjoy new adventures of Adam and his friends. And let's keep helping tomorrow's Muslims today. Assalamu alaikum.
It's Adam's World. Believe me, there's a lot to see. Bismillah. Let's explore.
And we're right back. This is Adam Carroll with UN This Week, and guest this show is Juliette Paauwe from Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect. And we're speaking about Nigeria, specifically the current crisis and the attention, the international attention to the many complex tensions in Nigeria. When I was a kid, we heard about Nigeria as specifically Biafra, which I believe is in Nigeria. Am I correct? The starving children of Biafra, and we saw the distended bellies, and it was awful. But to be honest, I didn't understand a thing about what the root causes were of that suffering. But that was I don't know if that qualifies as a genocide or not. Frankly, it's not discussed much anymore. Do you have any sense of the legacy of that ordeal?
No, honestly, I don't. No.
Yeah.
But I mean, like poverty and hunger is still the case in Nigeria as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it's somehow enforced hunger, as we saw with the Ukraine or even Ireland back in the mid-19th century, where hunger was used as a kind of weapon. But in any case, and I recall there was some sort of ethnic component. But so in short, there's a lot of issues, social, economic, and human rights issues. So as far as what we can do to get involved, are there donor conferences? Are there ways in which viewers might pressure U.S. government, other stakeholders to somehow put more attention on these issues?
Yeah, I think that's always a good idea, to find those states that can have an influence on the Nigerian government, to exert some pressure so that they can do some bilateral like influence on the country. Like we saw today that Canada issued a statement, the United States issued a statement. So these are important first steps to show President Buhari that it's serious. And what is interesting is about Nigeria is that international partners have consistently been like kind of reluctant and hesitant to push back against Nigerian authorities' assurances that the conflict response was under their control, because Nigeria is a powerful country. It's the biggest economy in the African continent. They play a big role in ECOWAS. They were one of the founding members of the African Union. So yeah, they have like significant resources and regional power, which results in a greater like stature vis-a-vis the international community. So it is important that we identify those states that have an influence on the Nigerian government, and also because Nigeria's problem with Boko Haram is not only Nigeria's problem anymore, it's the whole Lake Chad basin, it's Cameroon, it's Chad, it's flowing over borders. So that's also important that the region takes action, in particular on Boko Haram. But if we talk about the police brutality, then identifying any states that can have an influence, that is a very useful tactic.
Well, you mentioned the African Union, the AU, and does Nigeria's power and stature intimidate other nation states from criticizing them? Is the African Union able to take a robust response to this current situation?
I hope they will. If it further escalates, then absolutely, I hope that the African Union, because they have an important role to play in standing up for any conflicts and human rights situations on their continent. But yeah, as I said, like because they are such an important regional player as well and a player on the continent, remains to be seen how much people are and how much countries are willing and international communities are willing to push back. So yeah, it's unclear how that will evolve over time.
Well, I think we'll be watching what happens next, and I hope people will use that hashtag if they like to tweet, and perhaps connect with Beyonce and all the rest to raise awareness. I think if anyone here knows Nigerians, have a conversation and see if you can be a supportive ear at least, because it must be a stressful time. But yeah, is there anything else that you would suggest viewers might want to do? They can certainly visit your website, but is there anything else that you would suggest?
No, if viewers have the opportunity to influence any members that can have an influence on the Nigerian government, or if they are in Nigeria themselves, like join the movement, support organizations that are able to exert some influence on the government, and focus on human rights protections, focus on atrocity prevention, because that's important here as well.
I was wondering, is President Buhari a Muslim?
Yes, he is, but he's endorsed by the Christians as well.
Because I wonder if other Muslim countries or the OIC itself might intervene here, not to make it into more of a religious issue than it is, but just to use moral authority, for good government, for the sake of responsible policing. I don't know if there are international programs that work with the Nigerian police itself. I don't know if that's something that the UN does so much, but there seems to be, and again, without trying to impose, because I imagine that
there are several governments that are working with and also halted their support to Nigerian forces over human rights violations in their response to Boko Haram. So that's also something that we advocate strongly for, that stop assistance, financial assistance, instead train them on human rights, train them on international humanitarian law and rights during police custody, because that is important going forward.
Well, a lot to work on, and perhaps another time we'd like to discuss, you're working on some really challenging situations, Cameroon and South Sudan itself. So we would love to have you back. trying to educate ourselves about these situations, and not just as places that we turn our heads away from, not just being repelled by suffering, but looking at what can be done to help. And maybe there is a way for groups here to look up and research civil society in Nigeria. I'm sure it's rich, and figure out, is there some way to get involved in a appropriate way. So this is something that the Muslim community might do, for example, link with Muslims there. Hopefully not with Boko Haram, but with with other groups that. It's just to end on a more hopeful note about coexistence. Do you find that there is intermarriage, there is a strong movement to build interfaith and intercultural relationships in Nigeria?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a basis for that, because it's of course not only about conflict and violence. There's of course, everyone wants to coexist peacefully. It's just that certain circumstances in Nigeria are particularly difficult for those communities, like access to land, access to water scarcity, like fighting for scarce resources that is making it more difficult. So there's definitely a need for addressing like the drivers of conflict, reconciliation on a local level. Stabilization efforts are necessary to build those resilience, to also make sure that the communities are not driven towards joining extremist groups. So there's definitely like a basis for reconciliation and peaceful coexistence. Absolutely.
And yet we have the comment here on the screen that from one of our viewers that there's still gunfire, as we speak. So this is a very urgent situation, and we need to take it very seriously. So thank you very much, Juliette, and thank you for this. And to all the viewers, please join us in the next show, which will be with a speaker from Asia Center, speaking about Asian human rights and how to protect that. So again, thank you, everybody.